Well, Thundersteel was a strange era, and it kind of points to Mark's, creative productivity, as it were. I mean, Riot had basically run its course. They'd been ahead of their time. Unfortunately, being ahead of your time, you don't get rewarded for that. So Riot kind of had a broken up period, and they come back with this record that essentially is an important album in melodic thrash. It's an important album in the sort of founding of power metal, a European style power metal, but from an American band.
After a couple of years, we had a couple of records with Rat, and then we did the Vandenberg. Vandenberg was on that tour, and it was the Kiss Lick It Up tour, I think. We were just so frustrated at that point because, we couldn't get the support we wanted from the label, and, we'd always be playing third bill on the concert tour thing, and it was getting, we were getting clipped left and right. We couldn't do this, we couldn't do that, we couldn't do an encore, and it was, it was like, it was getting really depressing, to make a long story short. So at the end of that tour, we decided to let it cool out for a while, and that's when I spent most of the time in San Antonio, and which basically ultimately led to getting involved with Bobby and at the first originally it was Don Minstavin who we did the Thundersteel project with. That's how I really kind of got in with them guys.
So after the Born in America tour that Riot was on, they were supporting Kiss. The band decided to go on hiatus for a while. So Mark came back to Texas, and he started jamming with us again, and we decided to put our songs to use. So the Mark Reale band became Narita. And it was myself, Mark, Dave McClain, who's in Machine Head now, and the late, great Steve Cooper on vocals. We had the songs Thundersteel and Fight or Fall, Crimson Storm. So we started playing shows. We did a little tour with Loudness. We actually had some airplay by the great Joe Anthony on Kiss Radio here. And we started shopping. It took pictures. He sent it to his connects in New York. We shopped on our own.
The band breaks up, and it's gone. The band is gone for years. Mark calls and said, "I have a band. Do you want to come down and see it?" And I said, "Sure." I went down. I took my chief engineer Roddy Way. It took him, and we went to San Antonio to see Mark's band Narita. And am I interested in recording the band? Yeah, I was absolutely interested in recording the band. Did I know? I was interested in recording the band because the band had foreign markets. So I knew I could always license the band, and we could always sort of begin that same process again.
During this time, the hiatus was coming to an end. The guys were getting itchy. Sandy Slavin called Mark and said, let's try and get the band back together and, move forward again. So, Mark told me that he was going to go back and do Riot for a while. And, we were all fans. We were like, more power to you. And so he left. And, he said he'd keep an eye out for Narita, too, while he's out there. And so we actually headed out west because Sandy Slavin had moved from Morristown, New Jersey to Burbank, California with his wife Mimi. So Mark headed west, and they tried to get it going again on the West Coast.
But the scene had changed, and now the market consisted of Megadeth and Metallica, and it was a lot of speed metal.
Yeah, they knew my frustration, and they probably just didn't want to deal with me anymore. and I was kind of fed up with it. The support wasn't there from the record companies anymore. We weren't on a major label, and I was frustrated beyond belief. I was just like, I sort of had it.
Well, when Mark headed west after the hiatus, he got down there, and it turned out that Kip Lemming, the former bass player, didn't want to do it. He was doing something else with his life at the time, and so, they needed a bass player. Mark gave me a call, asked if I'd be interested. Of course I was. We had jammed together, and we had written songs together. So basically, my demos were the Slayer record and a picture, and he showed it around. Next thing I know, I get a call from Mark, and he says, everything's cool, come on out. So I packed my bags, and I headed out west.
Riot was half a hard rock band and half a metal band. They weren't really, they certainly didn't do speed metal, but Don brought that flavor in. Van Staveren brought that flavor, and he still does it really, really well.
The Thundersteel lineup that was years later. It's I didn't speak to Mark for many, many years. It just ended. We just parted ways, and the band just went into a new direction. And that was it. I didn't speak to Mark for like 10 years.
Anyway, so we started rehearsing, and then when it was time to bring Rhett down, he couldn't do it at the time because he was working on a solo record with Carl Kennedy, the Gone with the Wind, and he was doing the solo record with Jack Starr, Out of the Darkness, both great records. So he was busy at the time. Sandy didn't want to wait, so they wanted to get someone. And Mark used to look to me because I had quite the heavy metal collection of records. So I went through them, and I found the Ample Destruction by Jag Panzer, which was one of my favorite records, and I always thought the Tyrant was a great singer. And so Mark heard him and thought he sounded like a heavy metal Joe Lynn Turner, and he really dug him. So we called up Harry Conklin, and he came from Colorado and joined us, the Codon Chess Club at Sandy's place. And we started rehearsing, and we played shows on the Strip and all around. And then Sandy didn't really care for him that much anymore. Sandy wasn't into the heavy metal stuff like I was and like Mark was beginning to get into. So he wanted to find a different singer. So he dismissed Harry, which I thought he was great. So anyway, they called Retro at the time, and he was free. He was done with all the records and stuff. So Rhett came down, and Mark said, let's head back east. Let me get the old Riot camp involved and see if we can breathe life into this. So Sandy didn't want to do it anymore and quit. He didn't like the direction, and he didn't want to move up east and work with him again. And it was me, Mark, and Rhett.
That transmission was made out of that as a result of that. We put him in. They brought him to New York, put him in rehearsal. They were doing that material. Then I remember going to see one of the rehearsals, and they blew me away.
Then Rhett Forrester decided maybe this wasn't the way he wanted to go. He was very supportive. He just didn't quit. He wished us, well wishes. Said, "Hey, cool, more power to you. It's just not my thing." He thought we should get like a higher Halford thing for this. So he took off. He started doing the Rhett Forrester band, which I played with him on a few shows, and that was it. So then me and Mark had to find a singer and a drummer.
How did I first get involved with Riot? I'll tell you. I was just a working bass player in New York at the time, and I was working with a band, and we were doing some demo stuff. at Green Street Recording in Soho, which is where Riot had done a bunch of records. Steve Loeb was the producer at the time, and he was the owner of Green Street Recording. So I was doing a bunch of work down there, and the studio manager is a good friend of mine. His name is Dave Harrington. He brought me a cassette. He said, listen, man, there's this band called Riot. I had never heard of them. Never seen them, never heard of them. I wasn't really a metal guy. He says, these guys are looking for a singer. I know you can sing this kind of stuff. You got an audition next week. And he gave me a cassette, and I took it home and I listened to it, and it was a demo of Thundersteel, the song. I have no idea who was singing on the demo, but I listened to it and I went, fuck.
It was Dave Harrington's friend, who was my studio manager. He knew Tony, and he said to Tony, "You could do this," but and I was so not into Tony, but Mark loved it, and he could do all that high stuff.
My brother had the Thundersteel album, and I remember hearing it. I remember listening to it thinking that, oh my God, I thought Tony Moore must have breathed helium. He was singing so high.
But this was a time of hair metal and thrash, and yet this was a melodic power metal but speedy album that didn't seem to fit anywhere within the scope of things, and it sort of presaged the rise of power metal, which wouldn't happen for another 7 or 8 years.
I was looking through a record store one time, Strawberries, I think it was Strawberry, Massachusetts. I was just looking for my record to show a couple of people that I did do something. And as I'm looking, all of a sudden I see Thundersteel, and I said, "Whoa, that's pretty cool." It says Riot on it. I said, "Wow, let me check it out." Couldn't find my album, so I put it home and I put it on. And my God, I said, "This is not the band I know." Whole different departure from what we did. We were more, more hard rock. This was more metal. But all good stuff. These players were great players. I mean, the songs were great. Mark wrote some great stuff. He was a great guitar player.
I was studying operatic voice at the time with my college friend Catherine Dunn, who was a vocal coach, and she was working with people from the Metropolitan Opera Chorus, and I was studying bel canto, which is the style of operatic singing that Pavarotti does, that Caruso did. And so I had a trained voice, but I was really not familiar with working in that kind of register. I mean, the song Thundersteel, it starts way the hell up here and stays there. So I said, "Catherine, what are we going to do with this?" And she said, "Holy shit, we got some work to do." So we worked on, just like stretching my range and trying to find my balance in the countertenor register. And I worked and I practiced, and I only had a few days. And then I came into the studio and met Mark and the guys, and they were all in the control room, and I went into the vocal booth and they put up the tracks. And I did my best, and I'll tell you, man, I thought that I sounded like I was disemboweling myself at the time. I totally thought I sucked. But apparently those guys heard something, and they hired me, and literally like the next day or two, I was thrown into the recording of Thundersteel, of the album. And that's it. I became Tony Moore, like overnight. And I learned how to sing that style, like on the job while we were recording the record.
He took a guy like Tony Moore, was just a bass player with wedding bands or something.
Yeah.
So Mark grabbed him and made a singer out of him, took him to the studio, and they worked on him, made a singer out of him. And he was with the band for a while, right?
Yeah, Tony's just a great jazz bass player and a great rock player. I mean,
Tony Moore, right?
He was singing, but I don't think he was primarily a bass player.
I think.
And he sang backgrounds, but when they heard that voice of Tony's, what is this?
When Mark saw some talent, man, he grabbed him.
He recognized it. Yeah, he was able to, and he always let everybody else shine. I remember that.
That's it. He didn't hog the show just because it was his band.
Yeah.
He didn't hog it. He made stars out of everybody. Everybody took in the band, he made a star out of him.
Yeah, he gave everybody a solo. He gave me a solo when I first joined. He let me write songs on the first record.
Yeah, the bass player takes solos. The drummer was taking solos. Everybody was taking solos.
Mark looked to me and my bag of tricks, or box of albums rather, and for a drummer, and I was thumbing through my albums again, like we found Harry from Jag Panzer. The Steeler, the Yngwie band with Ron Kill and I think Rick Fox, and anyway, Mark Edwards was the drummer. So I'm thinking, okay, he played for them. We need a get up and go drummer like this, because we were shifting gears. We were going from the old school Riot to a little more aggressive music. So it looked like Mark would fit. So I got his contact information and I called Mark Edwards up in California and I told him what was up. And he was interested, but he was playing with a band called Lion at the time with Cal Swan, and they, I think, had a deal working with Scotty Brothers. So he was interested, so he flew up, and he actually recorded 4 songs on Thundersteel, which were our first demos to shop with. He recorded, it was Fight or Fall, Sign of the Crimson Storm, On Wings of Eagles, and Blood Streets. And so he recorded those, and they started to shop. And during this time, Mark got a call from his camp, and he had to rejoin Lion, so he could not play with us anymore. So we had to find another drummer to finish the album.
I joined Riot in 1987. Don told me that Mark was putting the band back together, and they needed me to fly to New York to record some new songs. Of course, I knew Don from living in San Antonio. They had already recorded 4 songs with Mark Edwards on drums, and for a couple of different reasons, they didn't decide to bring him back in, or he wasn't available. So they asked me to do it, and but Don had played me the tape that they had done with Mark Edwards, and I was blown away, with the material, especially Tony's voice. Just an amazing singer, and the whole sound of the band.
Bobby was a freak of nature. I had played Bobby for many, like the creme de la creme of New York musicians, studio musicians, who listened to him and just thought, wow, who is this guy? He was an incredible player, didn't need a band to play with. All we did is he'd say, okay, what's the tempo? That's the tempo. He had rehearsed the material. He knew what the material was. He made notations because he could read. And we would record Bobby before we would record the band. And then the band would come in and record after Bobby's drum tracks were down.
It's different. One of the guys was joking. They said the old school stuff, your head goes this way, and the power metal stuff, your head goes this way. So, I mean, that's kind of the running joke in the band, I guess.
And we got signed toward the end of the recording process. So, really, I kind of thought like everything was coming together. It's like I'm with this band. We are really doing some innovative, difficult, challenging, incredibly powerful music, and then we just got signed to a huge label. So I thought, shit, here we are, I've made it. The record label was super happy with Thundersteel. We were happy with it. The critics loved it. We went out, we hit the road, and the fans went completely crazy. We learned later on that Thundersteel had even inspired like Judas Priest, pre-Painkiller era. The record was way more important than we knew at the time.
How did Riot get onto Sony? I had a friend that was down the block who was very friendly with the senior VP, executive VP of sales at Sony, who was friendly with CBS Associated. That was part of CBS, but not full CBS. CBS said, we'll basically give you nothing, but at least we'll pay you. So as it turns out, they made the money that there was to be made in Japan, because the royalty they were paying for Japan was literally pennies. So if you sold 15,000 records in Japan, which was a considerable amount of records, you made nothing. You made hundreds of dollars on the CBS deal.
You know, it was a power metal thing, you know, and it was a different, you know, it was a comeback. It was a speed metal record. It was on CBS Records.
This is from our album Thundersteel. This is about my hometown of Brooklyn, New York. This is Blood Street.
It cannot be overstated how important Japan was to Riot when we first went there in 1989 and then 90. In the States, there were a few markets that knew about Thundersteel when the record came out and that sort of thing. But a lot of people came out to hear the older Riot catalog when we were touring. And this is pretty insane that nobody had a clue about Japan in the organization, because this is a band that had a song on the first record called Tokyo Rose, and the second album was titled Narita. But when we did the Thundersteel U.S. Dates, and then we had a booking agent that booked all that stuff, and he did some searching around, and he found out that Japan wanted Riot. And not only did Japan want Riot, but Mr. Udo, the legendary promoter that had brought Iron Maiden, Kiss, Motley Crue to Japan, he was the guy that was bringing Riot to Japan for the first time. There was nothing going on, and Japan really brought a new life to the band.
I mean, if you look at the lyrics, they're not complicated. It's about, you know, it's about glory. It's about a mythical warrior. Musically, it was performed with such ridiculous energy. I mean, my God, standing in front of that band was an awesome experience. The first time I heard Bobby Jarzambek, fuck, dude, I had never heard anybody play the drums like that. And I got to stand in front of this guy like night after night after night, all of these guys, you know, and my clothes were just being like blown forward, you know, by this awesome blast of metal that was coming from behind me. And I was the pilot of this motherfucker, man. It was ridiculous.
It's kind of weird when Thundersteel came out in 1989, because that was one of the best heavy metal albums ever being released. But it came kind of in the wrong day, in the wrong year. Everything was wrong because metal was totally so uncool back then. But I picked the album up, and funny thing is, with the two bands I had in the 90s, the first one was called Highlander, and the second one, of course, is Hammerfall, which I'm still part of. We covered 50% of all the songs of the album because they were so fucking brilliant, you know. And that album had such a great impact on me, and of course then with Hammerfall, because without Riot and without the album Thundersteel, it wouldn't be, Hammerfall would never sound the way we do.
And Mark started evolving with his guitar playing. You know, he loves the old schoolers, you know, Montrose and stuff like that, and Leslie West. And then he started liking, you know, the Priest guys and Yngwie, and he started getting into that. So he started being a little bit more diverse in his guitar playing. So when we recorded Thunderstone, it came out, I think it broke a little ground. I don't think there was a lot of power metal going on at the time. I mean, I remember Sanctuary was fresh out of the box then, Fifth Angel, but they weren't like Riot, you know. So I think that was probably one of the first forms of that style of music. Not saying we're the originators, but we were definitely
at the forefront.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, such an unbridled display of enthusiasm. Look at this, my goodness. Yeah, look, we came a long way for this, and I'm very surprised because I've never been to Hallettsville before. You are in direct competition with Chicago for the absolute craziest bunch that we've seen on this entire tour. You should be proud of yourselves.
My joining of Riot, what a big thing. I got out of college with a music education degree. I was going to be a school teacher and try and make it in the music business. So this is the place where Mark Reale and Mr. Reale first saw me play guitar. So we were on stage. I knew Mark Reale from Riot was coming to check me out, but I was looking for him in the crowd. I never saw him. Then all of a sudden I'm playing. I turn around, I look out this window here, and I see Mark's face and head, and he would turn around every time I looked at him. And then I saw this older man. It was hilarious. He would drop down like this every time I turned around. So I was really nervous. I was playing my guitar. we were doing cover songs. It could have been me and Julio down by the schoolyard or something. And it lasted for about, I guess, 20 minutes. I just kept on doing the turnaround game. And every time I looked, they would just turn away. It was the most bizarre thing. I tell Mr. Reale about it now, and he just giggles. He thinks it's hilarious. But they wanted to see what I looked like and listen. And then they left, and I never even spoke to them that night. I got a call the next day. He came over my house, and then I think I played Thundersteel, and he says, "All right, looks good, you're in."
We were playing fairly big clubs. The first time around, after Thundersteel, we were headlining like mid-sized clubs, playing to like 500 to 1,000 to maybe 1,500 people. The difference was when we went to Japan, of course, we were playing, bigger theaters. We were huge in Japan, and I had no idea how it happened. The first time we went over there, people were literally showing up at the airport with banners. It was crazy. We were total rock stars. It was awesome.
All of a sudden I get the call within 2 months of meeting Mark Reale in Tokyo, playing shows with Riot. And it was a big thing for Riot too, because Riot has never, at that point, wasn't touring in Japan, never been there before. So they didn't know what to expect. And when we landed in the airport in Narita, got off the plane, and we were greeted by hundreds of fans, like the Beatles. And that's all Mark said, the Beatles. Oh my God, it feels like the Beatles. There were so many people there. He was ecstatic, and we were nervous, and it was a crazy, crazy time. I remember taking these beautiful limos, like limo vans, to a hotel. We arrived at the hotel, and the entire lobby, there must have been 300 people there just to meet us. And I didn't know what to do with myself, as far as I couldn't believe what was happening. And the guys in the band who already had success before, they also were completely blown away by the reception. And the shows went great. We did really well.
The response all the way around the board was very, very positive. Was extremely positive. Did it sell? Oh no, not really. I mean, when you said sell back in those days, in order for a record to be considered a seller, it had to sell 75,000 records. In no way, shape, or form did it sell that. It got a buzz. They were critically acclaimed. You knew you were going to go on to do, that you get a look for the next record. That's all you could hope for, and that, especially after 5 years. After 5 years, it's all new people. Everything was pretty much new.
I have not seen a penny from the Thundersteel record. I didn't get anything when I recorded my tracks in 19 '87 and 2018. I still haven't seen a nickel from it today. So.
Privilege of Power was very different than Thundersteel for me, because I got to be hands-on involved with the writing, and I pretty much wrote all of the lyrics for Privilege of Power. And so what we did was that the whole band moved down to San Antonio for a couple of months, and we were staying at Don's parents' house, and so we were like, you know, we were all like, we became like part of Don's family down there. His parents were absolutely wonderful people. His sister Joni is a doll, and we had so much fun. So we're all living down there and just getting together and writing every day. And we knew that we were onto something unusual. You know, we were really pushing the limits of what that genre could do. I mean, we were taking this stuff higher, louder, faster, more complex, and yet, you know, the challenge for me was to float something over top of this mayhem. You know, this very fantastically controlled insanity musically, that, you know, instrumentally, that was going on underneath. But you know, my job was to float something up there that would be a counterpoint to it, but still match the energy.
Tony Moore era is, Tony Moore is the vocalist during this CBS associated Sony label type era of the band in the late 80s, where they don't quite fit in anywhere, but those records are now, you know, over time they've become very, very respected. Privilege of Power and Thundersteel.
Okay, so now we've accomplished this goal of Riot being sort of back in the critical eye. They were sort of like considered now one of the top speed metal bands. Mark and I had that same conversation late at night, sitting in the car, about, okay, now what do we do? And I said, well, you know, I mean, there's all this Megadeth and Metallica stuff is all social justice stuff. These bands are not stupid, and they're starting to talk about social issues. I said, so I'm afraid that we should probably try to tackle that area if you want to expand your base.
Me, Mark, and Don wrote all the songs to The Privilege of Power here in San Antonio. We worked on that stuff probably 3, 4, 5 days a week for a few months, practicing, writing, rehearsing it. And then once we got all the music down, we flew Tony in, and Tony sang on these demos that we had recorded. I still have the original cassette that we recorded these performances on. There's even a version of Exciter, the Judas Priest song. We did a cover of that, which never made it to the Privilege of Power record. We did these demos, we sent them to Steve, and Steve said, okay, you guys are ready, and then he flew us to New York to record the Privilege of Power record.
And then, when we were done writing this stuff, we went back to New York and started recording. And it was Steve Loeb, our producer, who I have some well-documented differences with, but at the time we were close friends. He had the idea to add horns to this, okay? And he approached some guys that he knew, like the Brecker brothers. Okay, I'm like a jazz fusion maniac, and I was playing bass for like a Tower of Power Brecker brothers cover band in college. I loved this stuff. Well, all of a sudden these horns come in, you know, blam, you know, it's like, shit, where did that come from? This is fucking great.
And we used horns, and we used James Bloodoma from Ornette Coleman's band, and we guitar, and we used Grandmaster DST from Herbie Hancock's band. So I knew that at least I would get the eye of jazz critics. You got the eye of a jazz critic, so for a heavy metal band, you were in a different category. We accomplished that.
And at Green Street, we worked at nights because the studio was booked with regular clients during the day. But we were quick with our recordings. We had everything demoed. And so we knocked it out pretty quick. And the performances are, on the record or on the demo, pretty similar, except for the exception of a couple of little extra goodies, if you're into that sort of thing.
Come on, man. This thing was a speed metal freaking, you know, like a controlled explosion, you know? And these horn parts were freaking crazy. I was out of my mind. I was beside myself. I couldn't believe it. And we're looking at each other going, you know what? We're doing something that nobody has ever done before. Nobody has ever. Who would think of putting fusion horns on top of speed metal?
The recording process was exciting because we stretched out and did really different things. We had all of the musicians could cut anything. It was the best configuration of musical ability. They were literally able to handle anything.
A whole bunch of things were different between going out on the road with Thundersteel and going out with Privilege of Power. The recording, some bad things happened during the recording process. Of course, the recording itself was great. You know, everything was really well done. But the problem, and this is where the band started having differences with our producer, was that Steve, when we finished the record, disappeared with the tracks, and we missed like 3 delivery dates, and the label was really pissed off.
Was the album late on delivery and there were a lot of issues? No, there was no issues, and there was no late on delivery. None. It was all delivered on schedule, and I can't remember one issue we had with that album at all.
And we couldn't get a hold of Steve. We had, nobody could reach him. He wasn't returning our calls. This was pre-internet days. There was no email. We couldn't text him. He just vanished with the master. And when he finally surfaced, all of that interstitial stuff, all the weird, sounds and TV clips and sound effects and nonsense that happens like in between the songs, he was trying to do like an Operation Mindcrime kind of thing, but nobody understood it. The band had no idea that this was even happening, and that was the album that he delivered to to CBS, to Sony. It was Sony by then, and they were like, "What the fuck is this? Where have you been? You missed 3 delivery dates. We fucking hate you. And what is this nonsense of a record that you brought us with fucking horns and metal and all this insanity woven in between it?" And like I said, the band had nothing to do with any of that.
It's a strange story what happened after we recorded The Privilege of Power. we didn't get paid anything. So Don started making some calls around, and someone told him that, you know, if you do a session or you play on a record or something in New York, you get paid through the union, the musicians union there. So he got the number or whatever, and he called, and they actually did have a file for the record. Somebody did some paperwork, and they did have a file, and musicians were paid for that record. And Don was like, hey, I'm a band member, and I didn't get paid. And he said, who are these people who got paid? Well, they started looking through it, and they started naming some names. And the players that got paid were the Tower Power Horns and some of the other guests that all appeared on the record. He actually raised hell about it, and we received a check for $1,600 each, me and Don, for playing on the record. And I was surprised he actually got some money from it, because I was just writing it off as like, you know, somebody didn't do paperwork, somebody didn't put our names in. I don't know what happened, but I still don't even know if Tony or Mark ever got paid for that, but Don and I got a check.
Now, we had great reviews, and we had mixed reviews. Rolling Stone thought it was terrific, and some people thought it was a cacophony of noise and styles, whatever.
When I first received the contracts from Vinny and Steve, I was worried about signing anything, you know, as any musician would be, signing a contract to a management deal. And a friend of mine recommended a lawyer and a music attorney named Robin Dwyer. So Don and I took the contract, and we met with Robin a couple of times, and we made some revisions to the contract. And Steve and Vinny were not happy about this. So before the Privilege of Power record came out, they asked for our thank yous for the liner notes and stuff like that. So we sent all that stuff to them or whatever, and those are included in the booklet here. If you look at the band would like to thank, this is all band thanks, of course, but it's like a special thanks. And band would like to thank Clatoon Knows All. That's a goof on a name, Clayton Knowles. He was a music attorney in New York that Tony, I think, had look at the contracts. And Rob Them Dryer, sorry about that. Legal aid for musicians in panic. You get that? Our attorney's name was Robin Dwyer. They called him Rob Them Dryer.
So when we went out for the second U.S. tour, it was with virtually no tour support. The label had pretty much pulled the plug on us. We had no money. We were playing tiny little clubs that didn't even know we were coming half of the time because the label was spending no money on promotion. There were no posters. There were no, we weren't on the radio. Some of the clubs weren't even sure we were going to show up. So we were, doing our best. I mean, come on, look at the stuff that we had to learn and perform and do night after night. We showed up to clubs where we were literally playing to like 8 people who were kind of pissed off that we were there, and we had to pull off this show. Somehow find that energy, because the label had totally abandoned us by that point. We were sleeping on the bus. It was amazing that we even had a bus. We were sleeping on the bus in the parking lot of the motel that the bus driver was staying in, because he had a better deal than the band. Okay, we didn't even have motel rooms. We were living on the bus on like a $15 a day per diem, and we were broke and abandoned by our label, and yet we were out there performing the most difficult music any of us had ever done, night after night, pretty much for ourselves.
There was really no tour in the United States. The tour really took place in Japan. Once the Japanese stuff was done, there was really no place for them to go. They did foreign markets. That's where CBS Associated was making money, because they were paying, the royalties they were paying were fractional. And so when they sold records in Japan, they were probably making 7 times what they would make on selling a record in the United States. They didn't care about selling records in the United States.
After the Thundersteel tour, we did a brief stint in America, and that was very humbling. We played to smaller places, and some of the gigs were canceled, and there was some things going on with the management that I didn't understand, because I was just a touring guitar player at the time. I wasn't a member, so I didn't really understand what was happening, and there were some problems going on with money. And that's when Donnie decided to leave the band. He refused to play under the circumstances that, the stuff that the band was dealing with management. They weren't in control of the money. Donnie left the band. It was a big blow.
Anyway, the reason why I left was after I did Privilege, we were going to go back to Japan after we went back, and it was a money thing where they were just going to, take more than I thought. So, I kind of said, if I'm not going to get what I think I'm worth, because I was a chief songwriter, I said I'm not going to continue on. And I think they felt like, well, we don't need you, we're going to go on, So, and then I was like, I split with the band. I sat with Mark. He didn't want me to go, but I said I just can't, be under these circumstances. I understand people make their percentages, but when they take everything, I just don't think it's fair for the creative, forces within the camp. So, I split for a while.
The album did, once again, it was sort of critically acclaimed, but it didn't do well in terms of, there was no sales to speak of. Did I make money? Not in the music business. I made money in New York City real estate. That's where I made money. I mean, I made money in the studio. The studio was successful. But did I make money with Riot? No. Riot was a labor of love. I plowed money back into Riot so we could try things and do things and so on and so on and so forth.
Came back from like a couple of years on the road, thinking, on a major label. I think, and we had sold some records by all indications. I never saw a dime. The only money I ever made was when we went to Japan. They paid us well. Nobody else did. And like I said, to this day, never a dime from any of those recordings.
So you're saying Thundersteel and Privilege of Power, you've never received a dime from those albums?
Nope. Because, we signed a deal that had a recoupable advance, which was standard at the time. But record labels have creative accountants who will show that you never actually covered your advance. You never sold enough records to cover what it cost to record it. So yeah, none of us ever saw a penny from either of those records.
So now the Privilege of Power album is being released. We get Pete Perez in the band, and we do a second tour of Japan only 6 months later, which was unprecedented at the time. Usually bands will come back for at least a year or a new major release. So we went back, and we had another great 5 shows in Japan, and everything was great until, again, another money thing with the management. I understood a little more at that time, but Tony Moore decided to exit the band. He wasn't happy with the dividing of the money, and it was a very difficult time for Riot. So to lose Tony Moore was devastating. Mark didn't know what to do.
I had dedicated years of my life to and taken a huge left turn from what I thought my musical career was going to be, and invested my whole life in this band. And so after the Privilege of Power, after that tour, I mean, we barely survived it. We were, we started fighting with each other. I mean, a whole bunch of guys broke on a bus in the middle of nowhere can lead to some tension. And so it really strained our friendships. And, and then that's all in the past, of course. I'm on good terms with all the guys now, even through all the nonsense that we went through. But in those days, when they came to me and said, "Do you want to do another record?" I said, "Same people, same management, same producer?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "Fuck no." Why the hell would I do that? You know, it's just like, I can't do this for nothing. I can't invest another year of my life, you know, not making any money. So I said no.
We decided to start writing, and we took about a year or two writing music, sharing ideas. Mark let me contribute everything I wanted to contribute, work on his ideas. And then the auditions started.
So signing time for Riot 5. A lot of fans for the signing. Big long queue.
We got Michael DiMeo in the band. What a great singer. He had the coolest long hair down to his belt too. And we recorded Nightbreaker. It was great, recording with him. And we did a lot of different styles on it. It was very different than the previous Privilege of Power. Mike DiMeo had a very bluesy, David Coverdale-y, Paul Rodgers kind of voice, and Mark loved that too. You know, Mark and I we loved all different styles of music. Mark was never afraid to go back and forth with different styles. And he very much liked the Beatles and how bands would change themselves and reinvent themselves. So a lot of people didn't like the different sound, and it was difficult. And maybe we couldn't, Riot was involved in so many genres of hard rock and metal that it could have hurt the career, but Mark always had to do what he wanted to do at that time. If he felt like doing something, that's really where he went. He didn't care how it affected certain people. If he was inspired to do something, that's what he did. And that's how great artists are, I think, in my opinion. I admire him for that.
The DiMeo era of Riot was cool. Mark's writing was metal still, but now he had more kind of a blues edge, kind of Rainbow Deep Purple kind of stuff, which he loved because Mike's voice was a little bluesier, and it kind of fit.
Then they enter this Mike DiMeo period where they're kind of like issuing records mostly in Japan, a little bit on Metal Blade. They're getting reissued. There's a live album in there. Metal is in a very bad state because it's sort of the grunge era. And the Mike DiMeo era is essentially more of this building a story for Riot being a sort of important American power metal band, kind of championing that scene and doing it more or less alone.
I know that he was taken away from us in some kind of altercation or some kind of, assassination, actually, in Atlanta, Georgia. The report that I read said a car pulled up next to him and someone fired some shots point blank at Rhett. I really can't speculate on it, and I don't really know much about it. The only thing I can say is that Rhett was a major talent, and he is truly missed by the world of hard rock and heavy metal, and he's really not forgotten. And to me, that's a wonderful thing.
I guess I quit Riot the first time was around 1994 after recording a few songs that appeared on the Brethren of the Longhouse CD. And I quit just because it wasn't going anywhere. I mean, we weren't doing anything. We had recorded Nightbreaker in 92 and 93, and I don't remember playing one single date anywhere for that, to support that record.
And we did Brethren of the Longhouse. Bobby J left for a little while. We got John Macaluso on drums for that. We did a very extensive tour of Japan, and we started playing European tours after Brethren. That's when Riot started coming back. We started playing a lot, and we toured pretty much from 96 up until 2000. We had a good 4-year run.
Time. Hey, by the way, this is actually where some of the historical things took place that, we recorded the record about. Rather than the Longhouse, a lot of it took place on Long Island. Here we are, beautiful Long Island, New York. Let's go see if Pete Perez is in the car sleeping. I think he fell asleep.
I did rejoin the band in 1997 in time to record the Inishmore CD, and then we did Sense of Society, and we toured on those records. It was pretty cool. And then I quit again in 1999 when I got the call to audition for Rob Halford's band, and I got the gig, so that was that.
We had Bobby J back in the band. A nice 6-week tour through Europe, ending with Vakken. We did Greece, back to Japan, and Riot's career was really starting to pick up again. Sons of Society came out in 1999, and we were on fire. We were playing tours more consistently, and the band was really moving forward. We had a little setback after that. We got offered a tour with Ronnie James Dio, which we were all just, ecstatic about. And the Dio tour was about to happen. We were so psyched about it, but then things with money happened where they said, we had to pay more money. We couldn't put our stuff on their trucks, and it was hit or miss. And then 3 days before the tour, we had to cancel it. We were very upset about it. I actually cut my hair off the following morning because I was so tired about, I was so disgusted with what was happening after building a Riot career for a couple of years. That was a big letdown for all of us, and so we canceled the Dio tour, and we kind of went apart for a while. Reconvened after a few years with Riot. We came back with Army of One in 2006. And Frank Gilchrist was in the picture then. We toured with Mike DiMeo for a few years. That was a lot of fun. We, we started playing in Europe with Greece, and we had another upswing of Riot came about. And then the idea came to do the Thundersteel reunion.
Why was there such a large turnover of band members in Riot over the years? Of course, if you talk to every single guy that was involved from the very beginning to when Mark broke away from Steve, they'll complain about not making any money. I know Steve invested money back into the band when it came in to pay for things, or food and equipment or whatever, But guys need to survive, guys need to eat. They need to come home with money to pay rent or, whatever. And I think the bigger picture of the whole thing is, we were in the dark all the time about the finances or whatever. We just didn't know, there was, we didn't know if we were in the red for the recordings or in the black or for touring, or we didn't know what we were making. What was received, which was going out. We just didn't have a clue. And the only two times that I made money with the band was when we went those two tours of Japan in 1989 and 90. And the reason we did make money is, we knew the booking agent. He was pretty tight with us at that time, and he told us what the gross was, and so then we were able to know where the money was going.
Special amps here.
Explain what it is you're doing here.
Well, this is for various kind of different sounds. We use this for solos, and then we have the incredible vintage Marshalls for
out of the personal
our rhythm parts for our basic tracks.
Out of the personal Mark Reale archives.
This is personal because this I've had since 1972, and there's a special thing in the bottom of this that I made. The other thing I did here when I was very young, that's the little Riot logo.
Ooh, ancient history.
That's
with the Batman chatting.
classic stuff there.
Wow. So that was the head used on the first Riot record?
Yeah, it was, and that was the Axe, the Axe guy from the Rock City record, right?
And then you naturally progressed from the Axe to the Seal, which I'm not making the connection.
The Seal holding the Axe. Right?
Ah, okay, now I remember. And then all of a sudden, then you used the Axe on the Seal, and it was never seen again.
Not until years later.
Uh-huh.
I just showed him something underneath.
The Thundersteel reunion, the lineup that got back together was basically me and Don were talking, and we thought it would be cool. Originally, we thought maybe 2008 for the anniversary of Thundersteel would be awesome, but it happened in 2009. And then we talked to Tony and Mark and Mike and asked if they were into it, and everybody was into doing it, so we got off running with it.
We all sort of got back in touch once the internet became ubiquitous, and that's when we learned that these albums that we recorded back in the 80s had taken on an importance in the history of metal.
That was a big decision to make, I know, because we weren't playing with Frankie, Mike DiMeo, Peter Perez, and the career was it was still tough out there. It was still tough to Riot to make a mark. So we decided to do the Thundersteel reunion, and they included me in it because I was part of the original tour. That was 2009, and we came out with Immortal Soul.
And so I guess it was, I don't know, 2004, 2005 when we all got back in touch. And floated the idea of possibly doing a reunion. But at the time, the guys had asked me to come and do another record with them. I said, sure, why not? What the hell? I was still in New York. I had a good job. I could easily, record an album with those guys and take some time off if I needed to.
In 2011, Immortal Soul got released. It was the first time the Thundersteel reunion lineup had made another studio recording. So it was quite exciting to be part of that. I played the Thundersteel music my whole life, but now to finally make an album and help write the album with these guys was a big achievement for me. Very honored to be part of it. Writing with the great Mark Reale, the great Donnie Van Staveren, Bobby Jazombach contributed a lot, and Tony Moore. I love his songwriting. I love his lyrics. He's one of a kind.
Yeah, Mark was definitely involved in the writing of the Immortal Soul material. He was writing mainly the mid-tempo kind of stuff, and Don and then Mike, when Mike came down to San Antonio, were writing more of the up-tempo stuff. But when it came to the recording, Mark's health had gotten worse, and he wasn't able to play. He is on the record, some rhythm stuff, but he wasn't able to do much at that time, and so I think he played on maybe 1-2 songs.
And this was, this was all Mike and Don in terms of actually creating the stuff. Of course, I wrote all the lyrics and all the melodies and did all the vocals and the vocal arranging. But that was it. Pretty much came down to the four of us to create that.
Mark was in the doctors all the time. They were constantly trying different things. I mean, it's really uncomfortable to have that stuff. I mean, Crohn's disease. It's not a pleasant situation at all. It's not. So he was dealing with that a lot. Yeah. I mean, he was old school. The way people used to do things. They didn't feel sorry for themselves, and I want a special door and a special seat and a special this, and I want special. He was just lived like everybody else, but it was tough because there were days you'd look at him and you'd say, this poor guy is in absolute agony, and I can't imagine living that way. But
this was a constant problem for him. He was pretty much always in pain. And when we first met, he was a marathon runner. He was incredibly fit despite his illness. He was managing it with medication and taking really good care of himself. But it was a constant issue. He was fearless, man. I mean, I remember, I think it was the second U.S. tour. The guys might correct me on this if I'm wrong about the chronology, but he had surgery, and he was literally healing from surgery, but he never missed a show, never missed a rehearsal. He would be changing bandage dressings like in between songs. He
didn't have a job because of the Crohn's disease. He really didn't have a regular job, and I know from touring and stuff that we didn't make hardly any money. I wouldn't say he was in debt, but he definitely didn't have any money. And he worked on the weekends with his dad. His dad sold spices or something like that. And, he wasn't rolling in the bread, you know what I mean? He didn't have a real job, like a real guy, and make real money, He was living he was an artist. He lived the artist life. He was poor, and he lived for his art, and he lived for his guitar.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. The last time I saw Mark was when me and Don and Mark got together to do a few rehearsals here in San Antonio. We had a few shows booked, the 70,000 Tons of Metal Cruise, and a couple of warm-up shows to that. So we got together just to rehearse a few songs because we knew that Mark's health was bad and he wasn't taking care of himself. So we wanted to see if he was still able to play. And he didn't play well. It was pretty bad. And after that, I took him back to the hotel and I kind of laid into him, that he needed to get his shit together. And, because we had this stuff booked, and it wasn't like, Immortal Soul where Mike could handle, this stuff. Mark, and we thought he would get himself together because these were live shows. You need to be ready to play live shows. But so I got mad at him, and then I left, and that was the last time I saw him. I didn't get a chance to, say bye or anything. It was,
So it was an honor for me. The album got released. We did a couple of shows, some festivals. Unfortunately, we lost the Hammerfall tour because Tony Moore had some mouth problems and teeth problems. And then, as you all know, Mark Reale got really sick.
During that time, a very dear college friend of mine moved out here to L.A. She was bipolar, and she ended up committing suicide during the recording of Immortal Soul. And that was a really tough time for me. I wrote a couple of the songs about losing her.
We knew he had it. I took him to the hospital. I took him to get treated for it. I pushed him in a wheelchair, and he was doubled over in pain sometimes, where I actually physically pushed him in a wheelchair in the airport, and it just started becoming worse on him. But he hit it a little bit first, and he hit it towards the end of his life.
That he got tired of the regimen of medications that he had to keep up in order to keep the symptoms at bay, as you know, as you described to me earlier. And he started drinking. And this was a guy who never drank. All the times that we were on the road, he didn't drink, he didn't party. He pretty much lived on like the Bible and running, and all of a sudden here was a guy who'd never touched alcohol in his life, and he became like a raging alcoholic because he didn't want to take these drugs anymore. And of course that further deteriorated his already tenuous health situation.
He was getting a little bit more sick. He started taking too many pills to ease the pain. He started drinking a little bit and mixing the two to ease the pain.
My God, it got really bad. He was kind of holed up in like an efficiency motel somewhere in San Antonio. He was involved with some woman who was taking advantage of him. He was an emotional wreck. He was a physical wreck, and we had no idea how sick he really was. And that fell on the responsibility fell on Don and Bobby, to go and try and just make sure he was still alive, and it was terrible.
Mark started drinking, which is so odd because he really frowned upon any kind of booze or drugs of any sort. And then he got in a really unhealthy, destructive relationship with a woman that really tore him apart, and that was kind of it.
He always been sick. We didn't know how sick he was because he's always had bad, good times and bad times with his illness. Not really good times, but better times. When he got sick this last time, it was different. He was having trouble playing the guitar. We had no idea it was life-threatening. I mean, he was such a trooper. All the tours he did, he would be in pain. He was a trooper. He never wanted to complain. We had no idea how bad it was. We booked a cruise. Mark was looking forward to going, and he got sick right before the cruise, and we had a couple of shows booked. Mark went into the hospital. I spoke with his father. His father said, do the shows. Mark will be fine. And we went to do the cruise, and while we were on the cruise, we found out he passed. It was one of the worst moments of my life. I lost a friend. and my guitar hero, my teacher, I lost. Very difficult. Changed my whole life.
He essentially wasted away. I'm not sure what they say killed him. It was probably just like a combination of the effects of Crohn's and the effects of alcoholism, and dehydration and malnutrition. He just wasted away.
I was born on these streets years ago. I was the king of the neighborhood, fast on my feet. I was elite. I was the star of the show.
We came back to bury him, and we brought his father down because Mark was an only child and his mother passed away, so his 88-year-old father was by himself. So basically we turned into the family. So, we got the grave for him and the headstone. We paid for everything, and all the Riot members were pallbearers and stuff like that.
It's kind of poignant that he kind of hid his affliction. But he soldiered on, and when he eventually died, I felt like I felt like I finally knew the reason why Riot kind of had this medium level of activity and not a lot of activity over the years, and it was because Mark was suffering.
Mark's longtime assistant, Damon DeBarry. Damon was worried that Mark there would be no money to bury him or to have any kind of proper ceremony. Damon was nervous as heck about that. Damon was like, I want my friend buried, and I want him buried properly. And his dad is like a mess in terms of having, his dad doesn't even know apparently what bank accounts he has or anything like that. I don't know, but apparently there was issues there. Mark was heavily in debt because of living in that hotel and charging things on a credit card. So Mike Flint's actually fronted all the money for we had him waked properly. We had a proper funeral service with a police escort and the whole 9 yards, and a little get together afterwards, and we put the whole thing together, and we put him down, and that was that.
I was literally in shock. My mouth was open. I was in shock. I just could not believe it. It's part of your past, part of our youth, it's just it was quite devastating.
When Mark passed away, I was pretty saddened because I didn't get a chance to speak to him. I really did want to reach out and speak to him and just kind of talk with him and just exchange some war stories and, talk about the past and talk about maybe even getting together and playing again.
Then I had heard also through family of Mark's passing, and that was pretty devastating because Mark was more than just a guitar player in a band that I was in. He was family because I'm married to his cousin, as I said before. I knew all his aunts. So, we were kids together, and we basically just evolved into this monstrous thing. We lost him, Mark, and we lost Guy. And Guy was another very sad situation, devastating and almost surreal that both of them are no longer with us.
I had gone to the cemetery to visit with him, and I sat and talked for a while. And there was no headstone yet. There was just a little plaque, but now is a headstone at the cemetery over here, Holy Cross, I think it is. And I went and talked to him for about 15 minutes, like I'm talking to you, why did it have to be this way, and I'm really sorry about what happened, and I just paid my respects.
And we had to figure out what to do. So I didn't do anything for a year after that. Donnie wrote some music. That's the way he we all deal with our emotions differently. Donnie just jumped right back in the music and wrote songs for Mark. I couldn't do anything musically for a year. And we decided to keep it going. I was very close with Mr. Reale. I am very close with him. He kept on urging me to continue. So with Donnie's songs, we decided, let's try this.
I started writing music. I told Mike, I said, dude, I think I want to fulfill what Mark said. We should keep going on in this style. I was a chief songwriter, so I think the fans want to hear the Riot music. Mark's father wanted us to do it to keep Mark's spirit alive. He told me he didn't want to bury the music with his son, and so he wanted us to forge ahead. And so after I wrote a few demo songs that appear on Unleash the Fire, I talked to Tony Reale, I talked to Ali at SPV, I talked to the Japanese label, I talked to management at the time. I said, are we doing the right thing? Can we do the right thing? Can this function without that guy? They were like believers. They said, it's going to be touchy at first, but let's go see what you can do. And we did these 4 dates with, the rest of the cats, the new guys and stuff like that, just as a tester. But I decided to keep it going.
Tony Moore decided to leave the band after Mark's death. He had enough with the business, with the ups and downs of it. So we decided to build again. So between the, Mr. Reale asked us to do it, the fans want us to continue. There were some people who were against the idea. We decided to do it. We found the great Todd Michael Hall. I called Frankie. I asked Frankie to do it. And then I got my my best student on earth, Nick Lee, to play. Not in Mark's spot. We didn't replace Mark. I decided to do all Mark's parts. Nick Lee did my parts, and we said, let's give it a shot.
So we recorded the music, and Ollie was like, well, let's give it a go. So I tried to combine Fire Down Under meets Thundersteel music, and it's amazing actually that it's doing better than we thought. I mean, I wish Mark was here, because my years with Riot with Mark, it's not as what we're doing now is big. We've never done this bigger stuff, toured a lot, and have the sales that we have now. It's kind of crazy, but we do it with his spirit. This is for him.
And we made the best album we could possibly make, dedicated to the music and life of Mark Reale. Unleash the Fire was released, and here we are.
What is beautiful that they get to do is that they get to be the Riot, the only Riot, and they get to play all those great songs from the Rhett Forrester and Guy Speranza era. So they're a little marriage of the two, and they're all young enough and vigorous enough to continue this and make Riot a great legacy moving forward.
We're putting out new music, and I guess give it a listen. If you like it, you like it. We did change the name of the band to Riot 5. So we're trying to be Riot 5 with the Roman numeral V. So we're not claiming to be the original Riot. But the other thing I would say, though, is when you look at someone like Mike, who's been in the band, since '89, even Donnie first hooked up with Mark in like '84 or sooner. I mean, when he was doing stuff with Narita and all that. So, and I think everyone would probably agree that Thundersteel is a seminal album for Riot, and Donnie was a principal writer on that and Privilege of Power. So I think it's a little unfair for people to say that they can't write it. But I mean, in the end, it's, if people want to see us play, that's what keeps it going,
As far as the Riot 5 goes, those guys, I had a chance to go on tour with them, a small tour in Japan in last September, and man, can these guys play. I mean, Mike Flynn's, Nick Lee, Donnie, and Frank Gilchrist on drums. These guys are unbelievable. And the most amazing thing is Todd. What a chameleon this guy is. I mean, he goes from singing Guy to singing, the rest of the guys in the band, and did such an amazing job. When I was on stage with him, I said, "What? I feel like I'm singing with Guy." That's how close he was. I mean, it was very eerie for me.
It's interesting. Unleash the Fire is a really good album, and it even surrenders more to this very melodic European power metal sound. It's a super professional, polished record, and the fans love it, and it's given the band a second life. Whether they're going to continue as Riot 5 or be Riot, it seems like there's a lot of activity and excitement around the band, and just the fact that this is a band that is chosen and has been put there by fate to be the band, to be the spokesman for all these great songs from the Riot catalog. So they can mix this new stuff with the old stuff and have a great career, I think, moving forward.
Well, really, the legacy of Mark Reale, to me, is tragically underrated. I mean, if you think about the legacy of what Mark did and the history of what Mark did and how many great records Mark did and the music that he did, but just if you look at those early records alone, it's unbelievable. So I hope that maybe something like this that we're doing right now, or me playing the records or telling people about it or whatever, it's got to be a bigger thing, but people need to know how great the band was, and of course Mark, who steered the ship all those decades, was.
Tell me about Riot 5 and their continuation of the Riot legacy.
Oh, I think it's great. I mean, some people have been complaining about it, but I think that's rubbish. I mean, it's what Mark wanted. You know, Mark's family wanted it, so I think it's cool. And I've actually got up and jammed with them in San Antonio. We did Denim and Leather, and that was great. So, you know, good luck to them. I think it's brilliant.
Yes, there's Rock City, and there's Narita, and there's Restless Breed, and then all the other stuff that came after it. Just an amazing history. And then what's happened is that as things have gone forward, there's been new members of the band. People who picked up the torch, continued to carry it, and made some great records as well. And the legend of Riot continues to this very day. So we're going to remember some of the members that have been lost, and of course some of the guys that are currently carrying on the Riot tradition.
The award is for the great Mark Reale, who formed the band in the late 70s. Guy Speranza, who was on the Big Three. Red Forrester, played on a couple records. We have Phil Feit. We have Jimmy Iommi. We have Peter Bitelli. We have Sandy Slavin, Kip Lemming. We have the great Rick Ventura and Lou L.A. Tavares, who were on the very first records. My inspiration before I got in the band in '84. And this year, not only marks us getting inducted, is the 30th anniversary of the release of my first record, Thundersteel.
Mark's dad asked me to read this letter for Mr. Reale. Hello out there. I thank you for the love and interest you've shown for the talent and ability that God bestowed upon Mark. It allowed him to write, arrange, and play music and become one of the great guitar players. Thank you to all the fans around the world. Sincerely, Tony Reale. In closing, I would like to thank Mike DiMeo, Pete Perez for the 15 years of service, and all the Riot members. We've had a lot, I think over 20 different members in Riot.
What I have to say is thank you, Pat Gesualdo, for putting this together and recognizing people from the past. It started with a little band for me from Brooklyn. I was called to do an audition for Mark Reale and Guy Speranza. We clicked very, very well. And that was the beginning of Rock City, which I had the privilege of playing on. And it was quite a thrill for me as a person coming from Queens, playing rock and roll. These guys elevated to a higher level for me.
We've always been under the radar, but it's a great feeling to be acknowledged after all these years. So thank you very much. And it's always been about the fans of the music. So thanks.
This is where we've reached. We've learned about the history, the legacy of Riot, and now we're finally at inducting Riot into the Hall of Heavy Metal History, which rightfully so. So, Mike, tell me your thoughts about when you first heard that you're being inducted.
We thought somebody's playing a trick on us. Is this real? Can this possibly be happening? It's an honor for us. I wish Mark Reale was here. He deserves to be recognized, and he would be He would be blown away by this. So,
Donnie, what was your first thoughts?
Same thing as Mike. I called him after I got the letter. I said, dude, someone's playing a joke on us.
this is a joke.
But anyway, when I talked to Pat, he said, he was a fan. He was out in Jersey and he dug the band, he from the beginning to what we're doing now, because then I addressed that. I go, you mean that version, this version? He goes, no, and him and Eddie gave me a list and it included all of us. So I was like, what's great, it's like one big family, and it's an honor continuing on, but being in the same company as he.
I call this poetic justice. Like all the generations of Riot all together, which in all generations had some great music. Lou, how does it feel like to finally get some poetic justice?
It feels great, but the most important thing is that we pay homage to to Mark and the stuff that he's done, and the fact that these guys keep on going with the torch and keeping it forward, and we're here because of them also. So it's I'm very honored to be with them, and also Rick.
And Rick, come on here. Come in here.
Get in here, Rick.
Rick, here's the man.
When you think of Fire Down Under, you think of Rick.
Oh, well, yeah, Mark and Guy.
Quirky guitar playing, and that's how Steve Loeb described your playing. In a good way. Quirky guitar.
Yeah, I would hope so.
How do you feel like to be part of this, all these generations of Riot?
It's hard to believe, actually, but I guess it's well-deserved after all the years of struggle that the band went through, and everybody knows the history of that, and it's just great to be recognized after all these years and have a place in heavy metal history.
So we have Lou, the early years. We have Rick, the Fire Down Under years. We have Mike and Donnie, the Thundersteel years.
Yeah. This is a present for Rick.
Okay.
Swords and tequila.
Thank you.
All right, buddy, congratulations.